Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Pooja Walia Maan from SGI Samalkha. Today we are going to talk on the module Globalization and Services from the paper Services Marketing. In this module, you will learn the meaning of service globalization, how can service marketeers go global, the difference between global services and local services, reason for the growth of service globalization, errors in estimating the value of global services. Here, we start with the understanding of the globalization in services. While the Indian tertiary sector is slowly growing in its contribution to the GDP, which is hovering around 30%, services account for only 20% of the global commerce. It is about 50% of the total economic activity. So, what do we mean by service globalization? Given this context, services can be marketed across the national borders of a country and thus can be exported. The phenomena of a service provider catering services to the consumers of other nations is called service globalization. At present, the value of services in global trade is slightly above 20%, but it is soon expected to grow due to the various factors facilitating its spread, with information technology being one of the most significant factors. According to the World Trade Organization, there are 4 service exportation models. Firstly, when a service is marketed across the national borders like the air tickets. Secondly, when the consumer crosses the border to avail a service like for getting a medical treatment in another country or a tourist visiting a country for recreational purposes. Thirdly, an organization opens a subsidiary in a foreign country to market services like a restaurant opening its branches in a new country. And lastly, when a professional is sent by an organization to deliver a service across the border, like a consultancy organization sending an expatriate to another country for delivery of services. Statistically speaking, only the first 2 models of global services are accounted for the globalization of services. It is important to note that most of the global service value is generated through the third model. Today, the service sector across the globe is witnessing a revolution and is driving an intangible economy structure with professional services like banking and various IT-enabled services being a precursor of this unprecedented boom in the global delivery model. Similarly, in the consumer markets, media and entertainment are increasingly becoming global, and the players are reinventing themselves to reach out to a larger global audience using newer distribution platforms like Google. Thus, service globalization is a unique opportunity for the developed economies to export their knowledge of the tertiary sector and increase their share of international commerce. The potential markets for service export are numerable, with attractive rewards as compensation for the time period till emerging economies like India, China, and South Africa enter the game at such a large level. So let's talk about one of the most important topics in this module, global services. Global services are intellectual professional services which can be catered to a wider consumer segment. These services can be exported and therefore are highly vulnerable to global competition. Given the IT revolution, these services are highly valued and have the highest growth potential in the years to come. The global services are more consolidated. The second is the local services. Local services means the transportation and hotels. These are highly fragmented in nature. The personnel of the local services are also local and are not likely to relocate as against the personnel of the global services. The local services in emerging markets are also facing the heat of the competition due to digitalization and the newly developing market consolidation structures. Now, it is important to note that intermediary services are also the local services which can now be delivered even to a distantly located area with the use of e-commerce, thereby bridging the gap between the goods and services distribution. So now students, how would you recommend somebody to go global? There are certain steps to go global. An organization can prepare for the global bandwagon by initially securing a strong market share in the domestic market. This can be done by being perceived as the player who better understand the local tastes, preferences, and relationships as compared to any other player. Once the roots at home are strong and secure, the service organization can plan a platform to enter the global market with a well-defined vision for a target customer it feels strongly about. Here, this vision will be a facilitator to develop a global service production and distribution network by taking advantage of the economic opportunities. It is ironical that there is paucity of having a foolproof method to estimate the value of global service trade. As per some statistics, around 60% of the service transactions are not even recorded. However, economists are very hopeful for the globalization of services to expand in the years to come due to a number of reasons. So let's talk about the expected future growth of globalization of services. Firstly, shrinking of the global market necessitates the globalization of the service. Secondly, a widespread of information technology powered by the booming application of internet will facilitate the growth of services. Thirdly, the emerging economies will not only demand some higher end value services from the developed economies, but also be a supplier of certain services to the underdeveloped economies. And lastly, there is a progressive movement towards lowering the national barriers for the entry of service providers in various countries. While currently, the services contribute just a 20% to the overall annual global trade, the secondary sector spurs up to 72%. As discussed, the basic reason for this big divide is the local nature of services, which cannot be exported due to lack of any substantial value addition. All said and done, there can be a number of factors leading to errors in building the data for globalization of services. Let us look at the errors in estimating the value of global services one by one. The first error is overlooking the service transactions within the company. Very often, the value of the intra-company services is not accounted for in the calculation of the service globalization value. As per the data of the WTO, at present, about 26% of services are exchanged with the organizations, that is, between the parent and the subsidiary organization. It is not much less than 30% goods moved within the organizations across the national borders. However, in actuality, this value calculation is underestimated since the value of the ideas and knowledge shared through documents, mails, and telephonic conversations on routine basis from the parent organization to the subsidiaries may not have been quantified and hence may not have been accounted for. The second error could be the IT services statistics not captured. This is another very important aspect of global services which may not be reflected in the statistics are the services like international roaming of telephone services, in which the telecommunication operators share the revenues generated during the international roaming. The next is industrial services considered as products instead of services. There are several industrial players who look for markets beyond their national boundaries to expand their reach and earn growth and profits. There are several big industrial players like Apple, IBM, GE, who have expanded their markets to the international business consumers. However, the value of these services are considered as industrial exports and hence recorded under goods and not under the services heading. Therefore, a significant portion of global services are not recorded for. Let us come to the next error, expatriate services not accounted for. It is a common business practice to send the personnel of parent company to the subsidiary company in a foreign nation for a short workshop or a short assignment. Similarly, a specialized professional may be sent to a foreign country to fix some technical glitch or maybe to provide some sort of a consultancy. Such services, though delivered across the domestic frontiers, are not accounted for in the global services. Thus, from the errors of statistical accounting of the global services, it may be assumed that the actual share of 20% could actually be doubled if the share of traded services was calculated in a different fashion. So, can we talk about globalization of services in the futuristic perspective? Even when the conservative estimates of the WTO are considered, the global services are reported to be growing at the rate of over 7.7% since last 2 decades. However, in the coming decades, the growth rate is expected to be explosive with more than 30%. There are many reasons responsible for such an anticipated explosive growth rate. The first of them is the digitalization of services. Since the year 2007, there has been a boom in the value of data shared over the internet. The digital revolution has had a significant impact not only on the business markets but also on the consumer markets, encompassing wide range of fields like advertisers, technical professionals, BPO, KPO, etc. Use of information technology has made the service trading easier between the companies and between countries. This has also facilitated in reducing the market barriers and increased the competition substantially. It is important to note that in case of online advertising, Google alone has a huge share across the international market. Another successful example is that of Amazon, which alone accounts for 60% of the digital books marketed in the world. Similarly, there are online players like Expedia, Book-My-Trip, Ola, who are giving a tough competition to the traditional travel agents and hotel operators in India by witnessing a current growth rate of 25%, which is estimated to grow to 50% by the turn of the decade. The second reason could be the growing demand of services. Presently, there are countries like India, China, Brazil, Indonesia, and South Africa whose economies are undergoing a rapid expansion supported by secondary and tertiary sector. Due to the low level of internal professional skill set, these countries import the services from the developed nations. But due to the human resources and skill set available, these countries will gradually start producing such services and maybe also export the same shortly. In India, while the contribution of the tertiary sector to GDP is low at present, it is set to see a major jump by the year 2022. In India, these services include healthcare, leisure, knowledge, etc. It is forecasted that in due course of time, the developed countries will start outsourcing the non-core internal services to these emerging economies. This growth is associated with the emerging economies' deliberate decision to give increasing thrust to the tertiary sector. In India, for example, the share of about 16% of the tertiary sector in the GDP during 1970s has almost doubled to more than 30% during the year 2013-14. The same phenomena is being witnessed in China also, where the government is giving importance to the services instead of the manufacturing sector. All these factors are set to expand the global service market. Let us come to the third responsible reason, that is deregulation of national markets. In the aftermath of the colonial rule, the newly liberated countries were skeptical of the foreign rule and hence developed a protectionist attitude towards the domestic industry. This, for long, has been a deterring factor to the globalization of services in these economies. As per the policy, if any organization wishes to market some services in a country, it is required to have its local headquarters in that country. The issue of recognition and equivalency of professional qualification between two countries has also been an hindrance in the flow of service providers, restricting the mobility of individuals. There are cultural services where there is a restriction imposed through quotas intended to protect the local industries. For instance, in Europe, out of the total content produced to be aired on television, 60% should be developed locally. While the deregulation of services have long been a topic of discussion in various international trade agreement meetings, nothing substantially has been worked out for the internal agreement on services as yet. Interestingly, the opening of the local markets has largely been a result of revolution in information technology and not due to the deliberate attempts of the national or federal governments. For example, the sector of global teaching, that is, sharing of teachers across the national boundaries, is not a result of any legislative agreement or framework. It has just emerged as one of the ways of exposing the local students to international subject experts. However, it is expected that more and more countries will reduce the entry barriers for the international service providers to improve the quality of services and also to take advantage of the latest developments in the service sector around the world. As discussed, time has come when there is a trend being witnessed towards globalization of services. The reason could be the deliberate attempt from the side of the policymakers in a country or a gradual result of the market economy. Almost all services are being globalized. There are 4 elements in this process of service globalization which needs to be considered. Let's look at them one by one. The first is Global Service Network. It is pertinent for the service marketeers to look for the target market outside their national boundaries and offer their services to cater to the local needs of the new market. This trend is being witnessed by the like of professional services in banking and various IT services. These services have been quick in developing and expanding their service delivery networks to the underserved markets by establishing a global delivery model by combining the local markers' proximity. For instance, the HSBC Bank has developed 15 service plants. These are the bank's operational branches to process the demands of its about 7,500 smaller branches. Similarly, Google has invested in opening 6 data centers for its data consolidation across the various continents. Such examples on a smaller scale are also common for Amazon, Apple, Expedia, to name a few. This network services the target markets at 3 levels: a global decision center, consolidation of the key data, and the basic administrative services by centralizing it in any country where tax may be saved. The second is the local offices, which are outlets or branches where the customers are offered a local point of contact to materialize the functions of prospect search, sales, delivery, and customer care, etc., where the choice of location of the local center is largely influenced by the level of infrastructural development and size of the target market. The second is time to enter the market. Well, students, in a service network economy, the marginal utility of the actual users of a service is positively proportional to the total number of consumers. Thus, it is vital for a service provider to earn that first mover's advantage in a new market. Some very successful examples are the current market shares of the US based Google, with 70% of the share of the total search engine market in India. And how can we forget the Facebook, with over 50% of the share of the social media network in our country? Let's move ahead with the next point: standards and norms of global services. It is important for a service provider to market its services on a standard platform of the target market. Often, it is desirable to integrate the current technologies of the organization in the local language. There is no doubt that the globalization of the IT services was possible due to the standardization of the operating system. It is interesting to note in this context that the share of three leaders in the ERP, that is, Oracle, SAP, and Microsoft, grew from 39% to 55% within a period of 3 years due to the standardization of the operating network and adaptation to the local markets. The last is the service hub positioning. Another critical decision to be taken is the location of the services. If the services hub is centralized with the key decision-making functions, relocation may not be the wise step. However, not decentralizing could result in the loss of market share and the local connectivity. So, students, let us now summarize what we have learned in this module. To begin with, globalization of services refer to the marketing of services across the globe to the predefined target consumers. Service globalization is a concept expected to boom within a few years thanks to the increasing use of information technology. With sufficient support from the creation of the required service ecosystems and lowering of the national barriers for the smooth movement of services beyond the national boundaries, a service provider can enter into the foreign bandwagon by creating a strong vision of his business portfolio. Global strategy must be well structured and defined, with all the functions and strategies aligning to the greater vision. Global services are the services being marketed to satisfy the needs of the consumers across the national boundaries of a country, while the local services like e-commerce, domestic transport, hotels are also becoming global, of course, with the help of information technology, where the services can be purchased from an international market. Global services accounts for most of the international service trade, like consultants, etc. There are several errors in calculating the value of the global services, like the parent organization not calculating the value of services rendered by its specialists to a subsidiary which is located in a foreign soil. Industrial services and expertise services being exempted from addition in the global service head. and difficulty in estimating that it based the international services. However, due to digitalization, demand of emerging economies and reducing of the entry barriers for the international services by many emerging economies, the service sector share in the global trade is set to expand exponentially. Thank you.